This is the Mobile Home Park Lawyer Podcast with Ferd. If you're looking to generate wealth and passive income in the lucrative world of mobile home parks, you're in the right place. You'll discover solutions to the common legal and operational pitfalls and how to optimize parks to maximize income. Your host is in the trenches. He's a real estate attorney, financial analyst, and mobile home park investor and operator. Now, let's turn it over to Ferd.
Welcome back, Mobile Home Park Nation. Here again today, teaching you how to divest of park-owned homes, but giving you the pros and cons of all the strategies. As a recap, the last episode we covered Dodd-Frank Act and the SAFE Act. I'm not going to get into the weeds too much here. But the options for park-owned homes to divest of them, obviously, sell cash, sell through a bank. You can rent them, but then you're not getting rid of them, obviously. You could do a rent-to-own or lease-to-own. You could do, which gets rid of them on terms. You could do a contract for deed. You could do a lease with an option to purchase. You could do a rent credit. And all of these strategies help you decrease the percentage of park-owned homes, which makes you better able to get an agency, which would be a Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae loan, also a CMBS loan. So that's a lot for a lot of folks. That's the holy grail, is to have non-recourse agency debt and have no park-owned homes. So how do we get there? How do we get there legally? So renting the home, that's pretty much the blocking and tackling. Everybody knows what that means, right? You rent the home, you own the home. It's clear you own the home. Pros, you get more rent. Cons, you have more maintenance responsibility. Cons, it's harder to get a bank loan on, personal property, and it's harder to get an agency loan. Another con would be it takes more of your energy, more brain damage, so it makes it less likely you're going to be able to expand and buy more parks. Also, less likely you're going to have the cash to buy anything because park-owned homes require cash infusion. At a minimum, a down payment with a lender. A lot of times, park-owned home requires just straight cash because you can't get a loan on it. Now, there's some exceptions to that. Like 21st Mortgage will finance 100% of the home, but if they put it in the rental program, they often want, there's some fees they don't charge, and then they charge a decent amount of fees and points and stuff. So there's some more cons to doing a rental. But I own park-owned homes, so I'm not saying no park-owned homes. Okay, so today we're going to cover more of the rent-to-own, lease-to-own. What does this look like? This is basically, hey, you're a renter. Over time, you're gonna own this house. That could look like, hey, you're putting $1,000 down, and you're gonna pay monthly rent. It could look like you're just paying monthly rent. I bought a park where the previous guy had a 30-year amortization rent-to-own, so I inherited all these contracts. Which, by the way, I should have covered that in the last episode. But if you inherit, the general rule, I think right now in the law is if you inherit these contracts, you didn't originate them, so you're not going to be penalized from them. Now, some operators and some lenders require you to divest of them like immediately, so they can be pretty scary. Getting in violation of the Dodd-Frank and SAFE Act would be scary. I'm unaware of the enforcement mechanism that is actually out there convicting people. So when I get into these other strategies, lease-to-own, contract for deed, rent credit, lease with option to purchase, all of these I think would be technically illegal. Now, do I know some folks that are operating and doing these strategies? Yes. I have several clients that operate with these, quote, illegal strategies, despite my advice. And I can help them draft legal documents to mitigate their risk. I have some practical strategies to help mitigate their risk. But is there risk of Dodd-Frank Act or SAFE Act coming back and biting them in the butt? Yeah, possibly. Now, some good news is current administration, President Trump and Secretary Carson, don't seem to have a problem with the law, with enforcing the law. They don't think it's even valid, is what I've heard. Now, they haven't repealed the law, so maybe I just need to call out Ben Carson here, who generally I think is doing a pretty good job, but he hasn't repealed this law, so for our industry, he hasn't done as good a job as I would have liked. So I'm going to tag him when I post this podcast, and maybe I can get him on this podcast. That'd be pretty cool. I think he's a pretty good guy, so it'd be really fun to talk to him. Okay, Ben Carson, sidebar. You just got a shout-out and a call-out. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled programming. What the heck is a rent-to-own? Is that a violation of Dodd-Frank? I think it's going to depend. Is it a financing? If it's typical financing, the borrower generally puts down some down payment, and or at a minimum is required to make typically long-term payments towards a purchase. So if your lease-to-own says that if they miss a payment, they're going to lose some of their prior money. That would probably qualify as a disguised mortgage and probably be in violation of Dodd-Frank Act. If your lease to own says that the occupant is required to pay for maintenance, which is probably why you're doing that, to be honest, then that may not be a Dodd-Frank violation, but that's probably a violation of some other warranty of habitability or some other general landlord-tenant requirement. Like landlords can't just contract away and paper it so that they don't have to do any maintenance. Now, does that happen? Yeah, and I have several clients that do that too. If you want to know who those clients are, any of them that don't pay their legal bill, I'm actually going to post those. I'm kidding. I'm not going to expose them. Okay, so rent to own, yeah, I mean, it's illegal, but people do it, right? So there's pros and cons. Okay, contract for deed. What is a contract for deed? A contract for deed for basically, it's similar, but you typically will get a down payment, say 15 or 20%, and then you have an amortization, such as 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and the quote buyer is required to A, pay lot rent, and B, pay a contract for deed payment. Upon successful payment of the contract for deed payment, they then get title to the home. If they default at some point along the way, they have forfeit their down payment and they forfeit any principal payments. So the contract for deed renter would pay the landlord lot rent, which would probably be a different entity. That'd probably be your land entity, gets the lot rent. The home rent or home payment would come to the homes LLC, and home payment would include principal, interest, and then typically a reimbursement for property taxes on the personal property and insurance. Because if I'm the owner selling this home on terms, I'm going to want to make sure it's insured, so I'm going to have it in my name, have title in my name. I'm also going to require that upon payment of the last payment, the home cannot be moved out of my park for X number of years, maybe 3, 4, 5 years. In my lot lease, by the way, I have a right of first refusal. That if people try to move out or try to sell it, I have a right to at least try to buy it. And there's some restrictions on that as well. So from a contract for deed, is that also illegal? Yeah, technically, probably. I don't know anybody who's been stung, but it could definitely happen. So I'm not going to be your lawyer and say it's risk-free. But if you want me to draft a contract for deed, I have a template that I have revised, and I've included in an exhibit some guidelines from Dodd-Frank. So these, and SAFE Act. These guidelines were never really promulgated into law. They were just kind of like, here's some suggestions. Things like, and things like don't be a jerk. That's kind of the general rule. Like, don't charge an exorbitant amount of interest. It was gray what that number was. So if it's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9%, that's probably not too high considering the quality or clientele that we often deal with. If you charge 50% or 500%, like some of these car loan guys were doing in Missouri, that's insane. That's immoral in my opinion, but also probably playing with some fire. So don't do that. So I would cap it at single digits. Also, don't have an adjustable rate. Also, don't have a balloon, meaning you have to. A balloon is like, hey, I got a 20-year amortization, which makes the payments low, but you got to pay it off in 3 years, which means you got to go get financed out elsewhere or come up with the cash. So you're setting people up to fail. So don't be a jerk. So maybe you have something like a 5-year fully amortizing loan at 9% with a fixed rate for the entire time. That seems more reasonable to me. I would include some verbiage that both the seller and buyer desire for the sale of the home to include financing from the seller over the term of several years. I would implement and include in your paperwork procedures, the guidelines that guided us on things like reviewing the buyer's financial wherewithal, making sure they don't have a debt-to-income ratio of over 43%. Where did that number come from? Having a reasonable expectation based on income or assets to make the payments. Reviewing their employment status, looking at their pay stubs, maybe looking at their tax returns, making sure that the monthly payment is fixed, it's clear, it's reasonable, and then look at their overall debt obligations like car payments, alimony, child support, and their overall credit history. A lot of that stuff you're going to do anyway as part of evaluating and underwriting if you want them to be a resident in your mobile home park. So that's kind of a mitigation strategy, if you will, is to put some key terms in your contract for deed payment, or in your lease with option to purchase, or in your lease to own. And then the lease with the option to purchase, what is that? That's basically, hey, you're just a renter, you're just leasing it. Oh, but if you buy it, if you lease for so many terms, you pay so much a month, one day we're going to give you the home. The way I typically see these, and I've seen some templates from other folks, I think it's a disguised mortgage, to be honest. If you have something up front, that's you can call it whatever you want. You can call it a down payment. You can call it an option fee. You can call it a pink, flamingo. Doesn't matter what you call it. It's what does it look like and what does it act like? It looks like a duck, quacks like a duck. It's probably a duck, okay? If it's non-refundable, it feels like a down payment. If it's applicable towards the purchase price, feels like a down payment. If the monthly amount that they pay to you, no matter how you slice it up, if it feels like it was calculated based on some form of amortization, feels like a monthly principal and interest payment, all of that means it feels like a mortgage, which means you're supposed to be a mortgage loan originator. So I see people get cute all the time with this. If you ever get called to the carpet, which I don't know anybody that has, but if you ever do, I wouldn't bank on that protecting you. So the safest option, so the pros, by the way, the lease with the option to purchase and or the country deed and or the rent own, whichever you do, the pros of using those strategies is you're going to have non-refundable money up front, which means you're finding somebody who is more committed. I like to say, they're a little bit pregnant. You're a little bit pregnant, you're pregnant, okay? And they're committed. They're more likely to buy. Versus just a renter, there's not a lot of commitment. A renter where, one day you may buy, or one day we may convert it, they're not as committed. So these other strategies, especially if you have, and I see people also on these strategies, they have like after so many months, the payment's like $1 or $0. Okay, that's a disguised mortgage. You just backed into amortization. Don't fool yourself. So what's the safest way to divest these homes, other than, of course, the cash sale or the bank finance sale? The safest way is probably the rent credit. That's the pro, obviously. It's most likely. It's been held up in a few states. I think it's been dinged up in a couple states as well, but not. I think it was Maryland. Can't remember the case, but not to the level that some of these other areas could be. And that was dinged up, I guess, by a state act, not by the federal government. But again, states are pretty scary too, right? So the rent credit basically says, I'm giving the tenants back some of their money. I'm rebating it. So I utilize the rent credit program, and 21st Mortgage lets you do it. So I just closed on one this morning, actually, where the occupant needed something like, I think it was $4,500 to get the loan purchased. That was the down payment. Well, the guy wanted to buy the house, but he only had $2,000. So back in the day, before the financial crisis, what shady people would do is they'd say, "Hey, you're short on the down payment. Here, tell you what we're gonna do. We're gonna up the price by $3,000, whatever it takes, and I'm gonna hand you $3,000 cash. And now you have the down payment. Congratulations, I win. I got the price I wanted, and because we upped it $3,000, and then I gave you $3,000, I got the net price I want. You got what you wanted, the house. You got a $3,000 bigger mortgage, so your purchase price. You got a little bit more mortgage payment, but you got in the house, and by buying, you're going to get equity, you're going to save, all that kind of stuff. So you want to buy. Everybody wins. Well, who doesn't win? The lender. We defrauded the lender. That's called bank fraud, guys. Don't do that. Okay, we defrauded the lender because they thought they were lending to a kind of guy that had $5,000 laying around, when the guy had $2,000 laying around, and I fraudulently gave him some money. So 21st Mortgage is super anal about that, which I think is good, and they require you to show proof of down payment. They look at the bank statements, of the borrower for several months preceding the down payment. But in this example, in one of my parks here in Kansas City, the guy didn't have $5,000. So I had to say, okay, go away, or I'd say, I can rent it. I don't want to rent it. He didn't want to rent it. So we said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get you in here today as a renter, but we both know we're going to work like heck to get you out of here as a renter and into the home buyer as soon as we can. So the payment all in for lot rent, principal, interest, tax, insurance, if he was a buyer, was about $800. So I said, I want you to be motivated to get over the finish line. So here's what I'm going to do. Your rent's going to be $950. So you're motivated to get to the 800 level instead of 950. So what I'm going to do, though, I'm going to give you back that 150. And I'm actually going to give you, the lot rent's $375. So anything above the lot rent is considered home portion rent. So $950 minus $375 means I've got $575 of extra home rent. I can rebate that back as a rent credit. So what I did was I waited. It took about 5 months, but that's 5 months is $2,875. So I gave him, rebated back whatever portion of that he needed. I gave it back to him. And I printed my tenant ledger off of Rent Manager, and I signed it and said rent credits of whatever the delta was, $2,500 for this guy Eric. And as a result, 21st Mortgage knows where he got that down payment. He had $2,000 from his checking account, and he got $2,500 from me. And as a result, hey, he got financed. And I got the sale, he got to buy. He's now saving $150 a month starting November 1. Really good for him. For me, I got to sell the house. Really good for me, which helps me get my agency refinance loan, which is coming here this upcoming 2021. I'm gonna refinance that out. This was one of the last 2 or 3 homes I needed to do this conversion process to. So I regularly pound on my residents. Like every time I see this guy, literally every time I see this guy, I go, "Hey, Eric, why are you paying so much, man? How about you start saving $150? You know, and I really don't do it to Eric because him and I were on this plan for 5 months, but I do it to the other guys. I still do it to him a little bit, like, hey, stay on track, but I do to people who are just pure renters. I go, why are you renting, man? That's a sucker's game. Build some equity. Do some principal pay down. Lower your payment. Okay. So this rent credit conversion strategy works really well, and because a lot of people they've never lived in a trailer, they don't know if they like the neighborhood, so they just can't commit, and I get that. So I say, tell you what, live here for 6 months. In 6 months, you'll know if you like it. You'll know if you like the house. You'll know if you like the neighborhood. At that time, we'll talk again. And I pound on them every time I see them, all these guys. And I pretty much memorize all the status of all my residents, and I see them and all that kind of stuff. So I visit the parks fairly regularly, and they think I'm the manager, right? So don't share this podcast. But, or don't share this podcast with them. Share it with people who are looking for legal business. I'm a pretty good lawyer. So anyway, the rent credit program is safer. The downside is there's not the upfront down payment or commitment. And then depending on the borrower, like this guy Eric, he was bankable. He was able to be taken. I got to take it taken out of that loan in less than 5 months, or right at 5 months. Some people, they can never be bankable. They don't have a regular job, or their income ratios, not enough for the bank, or they got some other credit, or they had a foreclosure 3 years ago. So you can use the rent credit program you can do it as long as you want, as far as I know. I mean, you could say, hey, rent credit, I'm going to do this. I'm going to give you $200 a month back for 10 years. At the end of 10 years, you can own a house. Because they can bail, that's going to be different than the other disguised mortgage strategies, in my opinion. May not be bulletproof, but I think it's pretty close. But it's more bulletproof than the other strategies. But there's downsides. So practically, a lot of my clients make the decision to go for the contract for deed. The contract for deed, I feel like, is better than the lease to own. Part of the reason for that, well, I'm not going to get into that today. There's a whole other. Okay, I'll do it. The contract for deed on the land stuff is more confusing, and as a buyer, you should never do it. I should probably write that down and do a separate podcast on that. But the contract for deed for a mobile home for you on the sales side, what I like to do with it if I draft papers, I make it a separate document. I make it a separate document than the lot lease. And where a lot of people do the lease to own, it's kind of in the same document. The reason I do that is if I was to evict a tenant, I'll just evict on the lot rent. Because we're not paying the contract for deed provision, they're not paying the lot rent. And in my contract for deed, there's a cross default, where if you default on the contract for deed, you're also defaulted on the lease. So that way they can't just say I'm paying one and not the other. But if I evict on the lot lease, here's how it typically goes in front of the judge. Yeah, dear tenant, did you pay the lot rent in this amount as Ferd said you didn't? Well, no, but hammer, I win. And then all I talked about that day was the lot lease. As opposed to, dear tenant, under this lease with option to purchase, whereby you put down $2,500 and you have an amortization schedule of this and your debt-to-income ratio was X, and it was arguable if you were a good quality tenant buyer, and was this a bank? What about this bank stuff? What about the Dodd-Frank stuff? Well, now I'm having a conversation that I don't want to have. So just get the lot rent eviction. Are you going to potentially lose out on some dollars on your judgment? Yeah. But I would like to find the person that actually got a judgment and a garnishment on an evicted tenant, and it worked out well for them. Because I've tried it, and the only person that wins is the attorney. And I've even found people where they work. I go to garnish their pay. They get they leave jobs. They flip. They go to the next McDonald's. They go to the next concrete company. And I got garnishments out there. I got judgments out there. I've tried to attach to their tax returns. I've given it to collection agents and collection attorneys. A lot of collection agencies now don't even do collections for purely rental debts. They do medical payments and credit card bills and stuff. So it to me is not the juice ain't worth the squeeze to go after the garnishment. I get the possession. That's all I care about in an eviction. And evictions are pretty rare on lot deals. On home rents, you're pretty much in the apartment business. There's more evictions in the home business than in the land business. But anyway, that's the strategy that I like better, contract for deed over lease to own. The rent credit is safer, but it's it's harder to get higher quality tenants because the contract for deed, if you charge a big down payment like $2,000-$3,000, you're screening out 90+% of the potential buyers. But that's okay because you're screening out the tire kickers or the problem children. I charge, depending on the state, on the rent stuff. If I do park-owned homes, I charge a double deposit. So like that $950 house, typically I would require, if this guy Eric, I had to make an exception because of we were doing the rent credit stuff. And there's a separate set of documents, rent credit documents, that you can do as an attachment or as a supplement to your, it'll be a supplement to your lease, not an attachment. But on the park-owned homes, I even try to get a high down payment. Some states you want to do 1x, but I try to do 2x if the down payment if I can. Or excuse me, I said down payment, I meant security deposit. It is refundable. Less damages and things like that, and late fees and other crap. So anyway, lots of moving parts on this stuff. I'm kind of flying blind here. As I flying blind, I'm just kind of going from memory, so I don't have all the statutory citations and that stuff memorized, and frankly, I just didn't think it was necessary. So here we go again. Dodd-Frank, SAFE Act, can be scary. So try to sell cash, try to sell with bank terms, or rent. Those are all very safe. Not as safe, rent to own, lease to own, also gray, contract for deed, also gray, lease with an option to purchase. Rent credit, it's only a little gray. So that's definitely a safer option. I just admitted here I'm doing rent credit myself, so hopefully I'm right. Put my money where my mouth is. No legal advice was given here today. This was merely for discussion. Until next time, God bless.
You've been listening to the Mobile Home Park Lawyer Podcast with Ferd Neiman. Ready to learn more? Go to www.themobilehomelawyer.com for free resources and materials to help you succeed. If you love the podcast, go to Apple Podcasts, give us your review, and subscribe today. Thank you for listening. Neither the Supreme Court of Missouri nor the Missouri Bar reviews nor approves certifying organizations or specialist designations. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely upon advertisements.